Yeah, okay. So,
Au nom de CGLU, nous vous souhaitons la bienvenue. Je m'appelle Sarah Hergé, je suis directrice de l'apprentissage et de la coopération. J'accueille cet après-midi un panel d'éminents experts pour nous aider à réfléchir à notre stratégie en matière de résilience. Nous avons parmi nous Debra Roberts, qui est conseillère en matière de Ubuntu, et cela fait plus d'1 an que les conseillers Ubuntu nous aident à réfléchir aux nouveaux grands défis et pour essayer d'élargir un peu notre réflexion en termes de ces concepts. Nous avons le maire de Bilbao, Juan Mari Aburto. Nous avons également Madame Madeleine Yorobe de Iriga des Philippines. Nous avons parmi nous également le maire adjoint de Auch, Monsieur Sazur Arimoch. Après, Monsieur Olkay Unver, vice-président de ONU Water, donc l'organisation onusienne pour l'eau. Nous avons le préfet de Imbabura d'Équateur. Monsieur Pablo Jurado est également président de Congopé. Nous avons parmi nous également Madame Sarah Kupka, qui est responsable de la question des changements climatiques et de l'adaptation au sein du réseau des 4 régions. Nous avons également parmi nous Madame Corinne Lepage, ex-ministre de l'Environnement de la France et présidente des Amis de la Déclaration universelle des droits humains. Elle est également ici pour nous aider à élaborer notre stratégie et nous aider à élargir notre réflexion, à la mondialiser et pour commencer à réfléchir à la
and then we will start with an input of Ms. Deborah Roberts before the different panelists will start to do inputs and discussions. So thank you very much to all of us, to all of you being here, and I would like to ask you in the floor to give a round of applause, or maybe all of us. Thank you so much for coming. So the video.
In 2017, 96 million people were affected by 381 disasters that were recorded globally. Half of them occurred in the Asia-Pacific region. Not all people are affected in the same way. Poor residents are most likely to be impacted negatively. Owing to their density and growing populations, urban areas and their residents are particularly vulnerable to flooding, earthquakes, droughts, conflict, epidemics, and other shocks. Disasters impact the economic well-being of the city by increasing expenses for rebuilding, causing disruptions and losses in businesses, basic services, and infrastructure, and adversely impacting the attractiveness of the city for investors. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is the main global framework that sets out targets and goals until 2030 to prevent and reduce the losses from disasters. Target E of the framework, which aims to substantially increase the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies by 2020, highlights in particular the role of local actors in achieving these goals. Local leaders are at the forefront of disaster management and risk reduction. The Making Cities Resilient campaign alone has already gathered commitments from over 4,000 cities to address their risk agendas locally and contribute to the achievement of the Sendai Framework. But we need to scale up and increase our efforts to address key bottlenecks to local action. Many local governments have developed innovative strategies to prevent and manage risks, and we have to share their lessons. Every global agenda must root beyond national governments, and local authorities must be empowered to contribute to the achievement of the Sendai framework. Sendai is a city, and all cities are Sendai. We stand together to localize disaster risk reduction and resilience. Tell us your story.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And you've had our panel introduced, but perhaps just to kick off and reintroduce myself. I'm Deborah Roberts, and I'm here in my role as co-chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. I'm co-chair of Working Group 2, which is interested in impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. So obviously the issue of resilience and the concept of resilience is important to us in the kind of work that we do. I've been asked to do two things this afternoon. Firstly, to moderate the panel. So I will be introducing the subsequent speakers and asking them to make inputs on particular questions. I will then open the floor to questions from yourselves. I've also been asked to give a brief 10-minute introduction to the notion of resilience, which will be the topic of our conversation here today. So let me start off with an observation that the understanding of resilience is a very contested understanding. It's a bit like sustainable development. Everyone uses the term, but no one is really entirely certain what it means. And certainly if you look to the literature, sustainable development has several hundred different definitions that one can draw on. Resilience is almost the new sustainable development. It's a word that we're all using, but very often we're using it in very different ways. And when I thought about what I might say today, I thought about the various stages in my career where I've encountered the term resilience and what it means in those particular contexts. So if I go back to the early part of my career, I originally trained as an ecologist. And that's very useful because the term resilience actually comes from the ecological sciences. It was a term coined by an ecologist, C. Holling. And it was really about reflecting on the state of ecosystems, their ability to survive change and disturbance, to return to an equilibrium and to maintain basic functions at an ecosystem level. So that's really where the term started out in the ecological sciences. It's subsequently been appropriated by other areas, and indeed we've just looked at this video where we can see that the disaster risk community has appropriated the idea of resilience. And in that community, it's really about responding to recovery from a hazard, about being able to manage risk and to maintain function and structure. So that was certainly a use of resilience that I encountered when we first began talking to groups like UNISDR, working on programs like the Appel program. So we've got an ecological situation of the term resilience. We also have it located very strongly in the risk management community. But this term has begun to evolve. It's also been appropriated by the climate change community. And so if I look at the work that we're doing in the context of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, resilience has been used almost as a proxy for adaptation. So in the world of climate change, we deal with issues of mitigation, limiting greenhouse gases, either by stopping their production or pulling them out of the atmosphere through the form of sinks. And we have adaptation, which is really a response and acknowledgement that we have already driven so much climate change that it's now unavoidable and we will have to respond and adapt. And the term resilience has now crept into that notion of adaptation. And I can tell you from the climate change community, many climate change scientists working on adaptation are not particularly comfortable with resilience being a proxy for adaptation, but we're certainly seeing it emerge in that community as well. So ecology, disaster risk reduction, climate change. Within the climate change fraternity, we're also seeing that concept evolve. So for those of you who are familiar with the special report on 1.5 degrees of global warming, you'll see that we refer to the use of climate resilient development pathways. And we're using resilience in that context of climate resilient development pathways to refer to development paths that don't focus only on mitigation, that don't only focus on adaptation or sustainable development, but indeed incorporate all three of those notions. So again, now you have a different use of the term resilience, which is really about integrating responses across a range of potential climate change interventions, mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development. And so here we have a new emerging idea about resilience. I then draw on my own local government work. The team that I work with here in Durban has been responsible for putting in place the resilience strategy for this particular city. And we developed that strategy through a process of listening to our stakeholders about what they understood resilience to mean. And their understanding of resilience didn't relate to any of the previous iterations I spoke to you about. It was really about the ability to work with change. And they called out not floods and droughts as issues of resilience, but issues of informality and dual forms of governance. So we can see at the local level, the contextualization of what resilience means has again taken on a very specific meaning, which in many ways is not related to some of the dominant narratives. And so what we have is a very contested meaning of the term resilience. Hopefully the panel today will give further insights into what this term might mean in their particular contexts. But the final message I want to leave you with when we think about resilience is not only does it have many different meanings to many different communities in many different contexts, but we always assume it's a good thing. And I can tell you now on the basis of the South African experience, resilience is not always a good thing. The apartheid government was an extremely resilient government. It maintained its structure and functions against disturbance, but it did not work towards the betterment of the country, well-being, equity, or fairness. And so in some instances, we're seeing a dialogue emerging around resilience, where in fact resilience is not a desirable property of a system, and in fact it's a system that you want to break down and replace. And so this gives you a very strong sense of the fact that the takes on resilience, and I hope our panel will represent those diverse values, really need to be contextualized within a local area, within a community, so that they decide what this term means for them. So with that introduction, as I say, my second job up here today is to act as a moderator. And what I will do is I will call on our panelists to make inputs and to respond to questions. So I'm going to start with the Mayor of Bilbao. Delightful to have you with us. Thank you, Mayor, for Bilbao to be a very dynamic, adaptive city. So the question for the Mayor is, thinking about resilience and the fact that you come from a city which is very dynamic and is responsive to change, what would you say are the essential elements of resilience? Design, the integration of nature within your city, institutional and social capacity and infrastructure. And we'd be interested to hear the Bilbao view on the essential elements of resilience.
Well, first of all, I would like you to allow me to say a few words to greet you in the language of the Basque Country, one of the most ancient languages in Europe. So, eskerrik asko zuen gonbidapena luzatzeagatik parte hartzeko batzar honetan eta era horretan aukera aukitzeko nire Bilbori buruz nire ikuspuntua adierazteko. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to take part in this important meeting and to have the opportunity of share with you the vision I have about my city, the city of Bilbao, regarding the future of resilience. Well, for what do we want so many infrastructures. For what do we want to have an improved economy? I would say that without social cohesion, without solidarity, there is no real economic and environment and sustainable economic and environmental development in the long term. So I take pride. I'm very proud of living in a city, in a country, in the Basque Country, where we enjoy an advanced social welfare system. So that's the reason why we work in the city of Bilbao, our project Bilbao City of Values. 2 days ago, I had the opportunity of visiting the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, and for us it was very inspiring to see there all the values, responsibility, freedom, solidarity. So values for us are the driving force of a city. The driving force of a city. If we have strong values, we can face the issues we have. We can be resilient to these issues. That's the reason why I try to work with my team and with all the different parties of the municipality of Bilbao, of the town hall, of the city hall of Bilbao, and work as well and share as well with the society the different values that we wanted to have in the city of Bilbao. And in our case, in the first stage, based on different activities with all different and relevant agents of the city and a lot of different citizens of all the different sectors of the city, we've been able to conclude a manual of values which identifies the values most cherished by the Bilbao society. Among others, we can mention the respect to the human rights, social justice, equality between men and women, solidarity, diversity, sustainability, effort, honesty. So if we have all these values and if we are able to share them with the city, in Bilbao nowadays we are known all around the world, I would say, because of our urban transformation. In the next future, we would like to be known as a city of values because we are able to work together these all values. This is obviously a long-term undertaking. This work of developing values is critical to achieving all the different goals we have to be a resilient city. In Bilbao, only 25, 30 years ago, we were an industrial city, and we were suffering the consequences of the urban and environmental footprint left by the heavy industries, especially steel and shipbuilding, that form an important part of our economy. Along with that of accelerated urbanization. This has been probably a necessary result of the rapid industrial development of the 50s and the 60s, which led to an important migratory movement to Bilbao from other parts of the Spanish state. At that moment, we became aware of the value, of the fundamental value of the quality of the environment for cities, not only for the quality of life of the citizens, but as well for the economic development and for the attraction of talent and investment, all of which demand of environmental high standards. Today, I think that we can say that Bilbao is no longer grey, but green. We have recovered our estuary that was completely polluted, and now is the axis and backbone of the city. We have invested nearly 1,000 million euro in the recovering of in the cleaning, the integral cleaning of our river. Now we can fish in the river, now we can practice different sports in the river. And we are working as well in the increasing of the availability of parks and gardens and trying to have a complete and total cyclable network. Of course, we have a lot of challenges, and here I would like to point out that of the energy efficiency, on which we must work at all levels, residential, community, and business. This urban transformation has been possible through the conversion of industrial railway and port fields that were no longer necessary. We take out the port that was in the center of the city out of the city. And we have done this without consuming green fields, nor growing in extension, densifying the city, redeveloping the neighborhoods, and improving the quality of life in every corner of the city, trying to achieve a cohesive and a balanced city. Nowadays, still the estuary is a great threat for us in the city. To adapt to this threat, we have changed the course of the estuary of the river in two sections, in one of them cutting a meander and generating an elevated green area to protect one important neighborhood, and on other side of the estuary we have opened an artificial channel that was built approximately 40 years ago. So that way we have converted a peninsula we have in the city in an island. We call it the island of talent. And we are trying to avoid the risks of floods, still doing three kinds of different works in that area. Building two important storm tanks, increasing the level of the island to avoid the risk of floods, and increasing as well the level of the wall all along the estuary, all along the river. On the other hand, and also with the objective of reducing environmental risks, we have expanded and protected the green belt, the green ring we have all around the city. Bilbao is a little hole surrounded by mountains, and all around the city we have mountains, and we have done different works. Reforesting the mountains with native species, acquiring ownership of these forests, and adapting them so that people can walk and enjoy them. As well, I would like to tell you about the reducing of the space of the car. We have in most nowadays in the 87% of the city, the speed of the car is 30 kilometers per hour. So that way we can have in the same roads cars and bicycles. And nowadays we have another problem in the city, that is the upper neighborhoods we have, and we are building more than 40. We have nowadays more than 40 mechanical lifts to go to these upper neighborhoods, and so that aging population can move in a comfortable way. And now I have 1 minute to finish. I would like as well to say that we have gone to the terrorism in the Basque Country. We have had during more than 50 years terrorism, and now we are building together a city of peace and coexistence. As I have told you, a city of values. And we have been able to go out of this crisis. We have when all the industry, the heavy industry fall, and reinvent our economy, maintaining traditional sectors as financial and business services, but we have nowadays tourism with a weight of 7% in our GDP, and we are as well important in the urban solutions, in the digital economy, that advances industrial services, and cultural and creative industries. So now I think that I have been in time. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor Roberto, and particularly for sticking to time. I think what you indicated to us is yet another perspective on resilience. You've shown how prioritizing values at the heart of what Bilbao does improves the resilience of society to begin to tackle difficult issues like protecting important areas in your city, dealing with peace. And so you've given us another perspective on resilience, which speaks to work that leads to transformation. So resilience not being an end in itself, but a route to actually transforming a city in its entirety. So yet another very valuable perspective, a great story. With that, we would like to move on. We have another mayor who I believe has been very busy, Mayor Afalu from the city of Iriga.
From Iriga City, that's in the Philippines. It's in southern Luzon. It's about 10-hour drive from Manila to our city. Honestly, I have so many things that I would like to share to everyone, but I really don't know where to start. Our city has, we're a typhoon-prone city. We're a typhoon-prone area. We usually wait for 26 to 28 typhoons in a year. Just yesterday, we had our typhoon. We call it Ramon. It's a signal number 1. We have, in the Philippines, we have signal number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we have the same with Bilbao. We also have Mount Iriga, we call it. It's an active volcano, so anywhere in tropical area, probably there's volcano. But we're near Mayon volcano, the famous Mayon with a perfect cone, the 7th wonder of the entire world. And it's an active volcano also. But we're lucky that Mayon is very active. There's no chance or opportunity for our mountain to erupt, but it's included within the Ring of Fire. Now I would like to discuss in 4 aspects. Probably I'll divide my topic. All these things, probably I will just share to all of you my experiences and what we are doing right now in our city. First is science and technology. Under science and technology, of course, we have to talk about biodiversity. Science can offer facts, can give us data. But since we are all cerebral, probably almost all of the people here are intelligent. Sometimes we tend to forget the basic. So right now, I'm your science teacher. Let us remember that the number 1 emitter of carbon are the people. We're 7 billion in the entire Earth, and we exhale carbon dioxide. So that's why we need more leaves and we need more trees. That is right, rainforestation. In order for the leaves to process the carbon dioxide and at least process it and give us oxygen, and the oxygen that we inhale. So right now we have our environmental code. We have our comprehensive land use plan, and then we created and we recognize the areas wherein we can plant endemic trees. Endemic trees because we don't have to change the ecosystem. We have to bring back the entire web of life, the entire ecosystem that's going on in our community. So that's science. And also, we're no to plastics. We can use recyclable plastics, but not those plastics that cannot be recycled. And there's no people allowed to smoke. So if you smoke, you will pay $200 because you're a foreigner. $200, or we can go up to $500. So no smoking. Hopefully we can go back to basic. We're using leaves for wrapping the meat, the pork. So it's basically going back to basic. And the biodegradable, we convert it into fertilizer. We process it, and by using African crawlers, and then we use the stool of the African crawlers, and then mix it with the biodegradable substance, and we call it soil enhancer. So that's science and technology. Then let's go probably to infrastructure. We have no choice but to upgrade our building code. We have to mandate everyone, and then at least we need science and technology to give us ideas how to improve and how to make the building resilient to typhoons that are very, very strong. Because in our country, we usually have super typhoons like 280 kilometers per hour. And the strongest was the Typhoon Haina, which is Yolanda, we call it Yolanda, and that is the most strongest, which is 300 kilometers per hour. So we had storm surge and killed a lot. Uh-oh, I have still two aspects. And then the third aspect is the social responsibility. So what we need is to encourage everyone to, in our city, we have villages. We call it barangays. And then there are leaders also in each barangay. And we organize the disaster team council in each barangay, in each village. And it is their responsibility also to address disaster risk reduction and, of course, implement the context of Sendai framework. And then we oblige them to come up with a contingency plan and then come up with a climate change action plan. So in order for them to know what they are going to do if ever there's a disaster. And the last is, of course, values. That's right. Since we are used to typhoons and we are used to eruptions and landslides and mudslides and flooding, of course, somehow in ourselves we created resilience. So with that, it's the attitude, it's the mindset of the people. By changing negativity to positive outlook, even if it's really hard to combat disaster, but at least we're still happy because we're all alive, because we have zero casualty all the time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Man. Again, I think you highlight two really important issues related to resilience. So evidence-based decision-making, you called out science and technology very strongly, but also married that with a back to basics, the fact that there is local and indigenous knowledge, which if recouped, can help the community improve resilience. So great kind of bookending with that story from Marigo. Thank you very much. Next up on our panel, we have got the Deputy Mayor from Osh, a very ancient city. So thank you, Deputy Mayor Azimov, for joining us here today. And we know that in your region, cities are very prone to climate change. So can you talk to us about some of the resilience strategies involving your urban and rural areas that are promoted by the city of Osh?
Thank you very much. Здравствуйте. Good afternoon, dear participants of the World Congress. My last name is Azimov, Jasur Azimov. I am the Vice Mayor of Osh, Kyrgyzstan. I would like to present my report before you. It is about the local governments and the resilience of urban and rural districts to climate change. Very briefly, I will tell you about my homeland, Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyz Republic is situated on the northeast of Central Asia. It is bordered by Kazakhstan on the north, by Uzbekistan from south, west, also by Tajikistan and China on the east. The total length of the borders is 4,500 kilometers, and the total area is 200,000 square kilometers. Kyrgyzstan is the country of tall mountains, with almost 90% of area being situated at altitudes of 1.5 kilometers and above. The permanent population of Kyrgyzstan, resident population, is more than 600 million. The capital is the city of Bishkek. The population of Bishkek is more than 1 million today. We have around 30,000 rivers and 1,900 lakes in Kyrgyzstan. Our climate is sharp continental with cold winters and hot summers. The temperature depends on the altitude. We have precipitation in fall, winter and spring, while summers are dry. Currently, the administrative division of the Republic has 7 regions and 2 nation-level cities. Also 40 municipal districts, 31 towns, 9 townships, 3 rural settlements and 453 villages. Population density 29 people per 1 square kilometer. Major cities include Osh 260,000, Jalalabad 105,000, Karakol 72, Tokmok 57 and Uzgan 53. Mountain, desert and semi-desert areas dominate in Kyrgyzstan. The crop yields are low. We have a deficit of arable lands, while we have a lot of pastures. The share of rural population is high, and the socio-economic conditions are unstable. As little as 30% of our country, with the area of 200 square kilometers, is appropriate for permanent residence, while 70% of area is highlands, uplands. The main mountain systems are Pamir Alai and Tianshan. The highest peak is the Peak of Victory, 7,500 meters. Many peaks are seismically active, which sometimes cause natural disasters. The President of Kyrgyzstan has issued a decree in 2012 that stipulated the creation of Sustainable Development Council. The National Strategy for Sustainable Development for Kyrgyzstan was created for the period of 2013 through 2023. This strategy includes the issues on protecting nature and provide sustainable development. It implies the transfer to sustainable development during the period until the year 2023 with proper consideration of nature protection issues and reasonable water resources management. The ecological safety issues were included to the national security concept of Kyrgyzstan. The key document in the environmental policy is the Environmental Safety Concept for the years 2007 through 2020. This strategy sets up key global, regional and national ecological issues and outlines priorities in the environmental field. We also need to emphasize that natural disasters, mainly landslides. You probably know that many landslides happen in Kyrgyzstan. These landslides are largely caused by climate changes and they affect the migration dynamics. Many people who live in districts with a lot of natural disasters face a dilemma to stay at their previous home and face the threat of natural disasters, and on the other hand is the option to move elsewhere and face other risks. This partially resulted in the greater development of the major cities, Bishkek and Osh. People tend to relocate to safer places of residence, and the result of it is the increase in residential areas, including private house built residential areas. Osh has been growing a lot in the recent 5 years due to denser development and intensification of territorial use. The area development becomes more and more dense. Some areas are reassigned the functional purpose. We use the economical principle that is called the polluter must pay. Taxes, fines, non-return deposits are used and other subsidies and fiscal instruments to force users practice more ecological ways of doing business. Currently, as of today, Kyrgyz Republic has joined 13 International Nature Protection Convention and is, due to these obligations, reconsidering its obligations on improving nature protection laws. In the recent 10 years, Kyrgyzstan has taken serious steps to improve environmental policy, laws and institutes. The reforms has seen the framework ecological laws being improved. All these laws laid out the basic principles and systemic grounds to perform nature protection activities. However, the regulatory reform is far from being over. There is around 50 laws and sub-laws, which makes the nature resources management ambiguous, which entails conflicts, prevents the attraction of foreign investments, sometimes prevents robust nature protection activities. There are no mechanisms that would regulate water management and land use, and it is also a probable cause of socio-economic and political conflicts. The Constitution of Kyrgyz Republic is the ground for the whole regulatory basis. Kyrgyzstan accepts the global legal system where international obligations have a priority before the national laws. The legislators adapt existing legislation or create new laws to implement the international norms to the national legislation. The legislative basis in the field of rational nature management is an important condition for effective legal regulation for land, water, forests use and the use of other natural resources. We need to emphasize that in 2010 the Asian Development Bank has financed the project on extraordinary recovery and reconstruction, allocating more than $11 million. This money was spent on 4 fields. Infiltration gallery. Second, the creation of a water duct from the dam to water filtering plant. The total length is 4.7 kilometers. Third, reconstruction of a chlorination station in Özgur village. And fourth, capital repairs of the 6,000 square meters reservoir. In 2019, the city administration of Osh has reconstructed the central park of the city, Toktogul Park, spending more than $500,000. A boulevard was built which has seen almost $500,000 spent on it. And 4 micro-districts of the city have seen new gardens and parks being built in public-private partnership. That's it. I thank you for your attention.
Azimov, for that input. Again, you've brought new perspectives on components of resilience. You've spoken very strongly to the role of national government in creating a framework for local government action. You've also highlighted an issue which is of increasing prominence as we look at societies looking to adapt to hazards and other challenges, that of migration. So again, important perspectives for us on the issue of resilience, and thank you for that. Well, certainly we've heard a lot about restoration of catchments. We've heard about Kyrgyzstan with, I think, 30,000 rivers. So water is clearly an issue, and so our next speaker is well placed to provide us with insight on that issue. Mr. Unvar is our Vice Chair from UN Water. And it's very clear, I think, on the basis of what we've heard from our city leaders, that water scarcity and indeed treatment of that important resource are critical for the functioning and resilience of cities, and indeed even for the survival of citizens. We know that the kind of conflicts over these resources impact on intra and intergovernmental relations and opportunities. So do you think that the experiences you've heard presented here contribute to sustainable and resilient cities from a water perspective?
Thank you. Yes, they do. I guess the more proper question is it enough? First of all, let me start by thanking UCLG for inviting UN Water to their summit. We appreciate seeing water being prominently featured in this meeting, and very happy to contribute to this event. For those of you who may not be familiar with UN Water, we are the coordination mechanism of the United Nations regarding water and sanitation issues. And as such, we represent 32 agencies, entities of the United Nations, and 41 partners of global nature, of which UCLG is one. Among the many activities that we have as UN Water, we issued last year a synthesis report on the water and sanitation goal, SDG number 6, and presented it to the high-level political forum in New York when SDG number 6 was being reviewed. And the overarching message was that we are lagging behind in achieving the objectives and targets of this particular sustainable development goal. What I would like to do here within the next 3 minutes is to tell you about the resilience-related aspects of this report as linked to cities and urban management. Why is water important for resilience? We drink 2 to 4 liters of water a day and use anywhere from 20 to 200 liters in our daily activities such as hygiene and cooking, washing, etc. But we eat about 5,000 liters of water per day embedded in the food that we eat, and our water footprint is much higher depending on the lifestyle that we have. And all of these relate to resilience. So there are 4 types of actions that relate to resilience and cities. The first one is the direct one, the one in the water management realm, which would cover obvious water management improvement that range from minimizing losses from the city distribution networks to optimizing the way that water and sanitation wastewater systems are managed. And there are many opportunities here. And one that I can talk about very quickly is the use of circular economies, and which is valid for every economic activity, but for wastewater issues, this is even more valid. The second one is other municipal services. We have water impacted through municipal services and used in municipal services. And the example from here could be nature-based solutions and urban and peri-urban agriculture, which can provide also for livelihoods, climate change adaptation, flood management, as well as biodiversity enhancement. The third type of action is on the part of the citizens of cities in terms of minimizing their water waste, their food loss and waste, and adapting sustainable diets. All 3 of these have great impact on the availability and quality of water resources available to all of us. And number 4 are for our leaders to have holistic perspectives. We have mentioned here so far Sendai Framework, Paris Climate Accord, Sustainable Development Goals. To the end user, they are all the same. They all serve to the same end, although formulated differently and going in different tracks. And our leaders should see this. And water is one of the few elements that actually cuts across all these tracks and provides great opportunities for them to synergize their efforts in various municipal activities. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for that. And again, we are opening up various facets of resilience that are new. Certainly, having worked or currently working on the strategic environmental assessment for this city, we equally are lagging behind on Sustainable Development Goal 6 in terms of water, which is a critical one for all African cities. The importance of the circular economy, a critical way of improving resilience, minimizing waste in resources, and mayors have variously called out the importance of nature-based solutions. So again, an important reiteration, I believe, of an important and new emerging element of resilience in the urban debate. But of course, cities don't stand by themselves. They are surrounded by vast rural areas. And so I'm going to call on our next speaker, Mr. Jurado, who is president of Congope, to really talk to us and give us an example of the contribution of those surrounding hinterlands of the rural areas to the resiliency and environment of our cities. So if I could hand over to you for input on the importance of rural areas to urban resiliency.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to all of my fellow panelists. Ecuador is, of course, located on the equator. This is where the name comes from, where we have perpendicular sun rays. We're not either north or south. We have volcanoes. We are in the so-called line of fire, Línea de Fuego. Tungurahua is the most famous one that you probably heard about over recent years because it has been active. And we have Cotopaxi as well, another one. Cayambe is the name of another volcano. Then we have actually a volcano that is in the capital of our country. It has caused a few problems itself because we are in a high seismic risk area. 2 years ago, in April, we had an earthquake that was in the coastal area of Ecuador, affecting Esmeraldas, that's one province, and Manalqui, another province, which along our coast. So we have experiences that have been driven by the consortium of provincial governments. We have a territorial division where we are responsible for certain areas. We're like governors in other countries. We're called prefects, though. And the Ministry of Environment has given us, as the prefects, mostly the responsibility here. We are the environmental responsibility or authority. That means we don't just have to work in rural areas, but we also have to do our scrutiny with regard to compliance with everything to do with contamination, pollution in cities. And that's when we link up with the municipal governments, with the mayors at that level of government. And we give each other support between the two different levels of territorial government. We also know we have to be complementary. So we do work in rural areas, particularly with our indigenous peoples. We have indigenous people scattered all over the territory. And we also work with people in urban areas. We're working on environmental education campaigns, particularly. We always coordinate those with the Environmental Ministry, which is the overarching authority for the environment. We are just allocated some of that responsibility, as I said, the monitoring and the scrutiny with regard to compliance with pollution regulations. We've also thought it was very important for us to work with the young generations, those rural areas, so that the youngsters can start to understand that climate change is a reality today and that we have to address it. And together with the young people there, who perhaps are much more open to the use of new technologies, they like to use social media. They don't just rely on conventional communication sources. They use the networks, don't we? They use the media themselves instead of just receiving from the media, and they can pass on information and are much more in tune with and linked up with what's going on in the rest of the world. So we have weekend events. They come and help us look after the water resources. They go out to the countryside, and we can also link up with our clean water utilities. Of course, the water's coming in from the rural areas into the cities, and so we link up with them. Of course, we need investment to do this. We've got also support from international cooperation. In my province, for instance, we've been working with the indigenous communities through some incentives that are all like basic baskets of foodstuffs. So we give them the food, but the indigenous people have to help us with the ways to actually stop fires. We have to explain that they have to actually open up the accesses and have open up certain divisions in the woods to stop the fire going through. We have to adapt to climate change. And let me stress that we are encouraging people, incentivizing people. We're trying to encourage new practices because we realize that we almost have to go back to the way we were. We have to try and reverse the damages that have been caused by climate change through good practices. So, in short, we think that you have to face the future with optimism, despite the bad weather.
And indeed, I think Durban has to face the future with optimism, given the bad weather outside of this convention centre at the moment. We've certainly I've never heard so many references to volcanoes in a discussion around resilience. I'm beginning to feel that this is our major contribution, that volcanoes are a critical consideration in resilience. But perhaps on a more serious note, I think the focus on youth, on education, on using new technology harks back to what the Mayor of Bilbao spoke to us about a society in transformation, of creating new values, engaging new sectors of society to become important movers of change and transformation. So I think that, again, is an important aspect. And indeed, from a climate change perspective, we can see from the youth mobilization around the world how important that sector of society with a very clear set of values is in beginning to change the narrative around issues like climate change and hence resilience. I'm now going to move on to the next member of our panel, and I feel that she and I are kindred spirits. We seem to work in the same arenas of climate change adaptation. Ms. Kupka, and I'm going to ask you to talk to us about the regional perspective and how that regional perspective, regional policy, can help us strengthen overall resilience in this urban, rural region that we have to be tackling from a resilience point of view.
Thank you, Mrs. Roberts, and also thank you to the UCLG Secretariat for letting us represent, alongside with the President of the Congope, to represent the regional voice in this Congress and in this session here. Because in this whole debate, we should not forget the key role of regional governments in this regard. As was said in the video, every global agenda must root beyond the national governments, and the regional level is the first one below these national governments and a key player alongside with the local authorities, of course. And this is because they are positioned, as I said, between the national and the local level. So they ensure the vertical integration of these agendas, and they make sure that the local needs are transmitted to the national level and ultimately to the international level. And then on the other hand, they also translate then international and national strategies and policies to the local level, to the inhabitants, and implement them on the ground together with the local partners, of course. So they are crucial for avoiding the policy gaps between the local and the national level and the policy frameworks. And they are not only the nexus between the national and the local level, but they also mean crucial support to local initiatives. For example, smaller isolated human settlements, often in rural areas who lack the resources, the capacities. They are crucial support to them. And they are also very important in managing the linkages between the rural and the urban areas through integrated territorial planning. And further, they can shape the present and the future of resilience within their territories, as they have key responsibilities, as we already heard a little bit, in key areas for economic development, research and innovation, education, environmental protection, health, and then they can support the efforts deployed by the local authority in strengthening their resilience to climate and disaster risk, in building capacities, and also very important, deploying available financing. So talking a little bit more about the relationship between the rural and the urban areas and the role of regional levels in this regard. First, I would like to highlight that we should not consider urban and rural areas as totally separate entities, but more as a continuum. So there are multiple and complex interconnections between the rural and the urban spaces. For example, in the mega-urban regions, many people work in one municipality but sleep and own property in another one, or even in the rural area without a municipal authority. And this has consequences for the delivering of services, for public expenditure, for tax revenues, and especially where the local authorities do not have the means in terms of the human, technical, or budgetary resources. Regional governments act in their subsidiary capacity, and I think this is an important principle also to mention here, like this subsidiary principle between the different levels of government. And also with all these ecological transitions, with climate change, there are a lot of transboundary challenges that also occur in connection with growing urbanization and within all this changing environmental contexts. And coordination and collaboration between city and local governments is very necessary, and regional governments can be a framework for facilitating this. So this is why we contributed to UN Habitat's urban-rural linkages guiding principles, and actually some of my colleagues were in the first international forum on urban and rural linkages just a few days ago in China. Which are aiming at guiding the implementation of both the goals and the targets of the SDGs, but also the provisions of the new urban agenda launched at Habitat 3. So, yeah, I just would like to say that because the future of resilience is not only defined in the big cities, we need to ensure that all levels, including also the small and intermediary cities and towns, the rural areas, become resilient and sustainable territories. And I think regional governments play a huge part in this. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that input. And I think your key message is that scale really matters when we think about resilience. That we shouldn't be exclusive and only think about our larger cities, that the small cities are important players as well, that we shouldn't be thinking of cities outside of their rural hinterlands, and that the city region is probably a key area for action. And that tying together of various governance levels, that vertical integration between the various scales, I think is important. So a really important message for resilience. So just moving on now to our next contributor, Ms. Lepage, who's indeed a former minister and knows a great deal, I'm sure, about vertical integration. So you've heard a variety of experiences and challenges and actions. There's a lot of work happening here at the UCLG Congress, all about moving ideas into action. Reflecting on what you've heard, what kind of things do you think local governments and regional governments can do to act on the issue of resilience? What kind of institutional partnerships would you imagine are important to resilience?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Roberts, and of course, thank you very much to UCLGO for inviting us. I think we are in new times now, and that means new concepts. You yourself, moderator, talked about that. You talked about the definitions of resilience, didn't you? And that means that we need a new legal framework too. We are forced to be creative and inventive about the way that we set up the new legal framework to be able to deal with resilience in the different forms that you've talked about. I think you talked about 3 definitions, didn't you? We have to think how we can bring in the general public to participate and all public bodies at all different levels. How can we restate those values and principles so that we can share them too? And public policies, do we run them by defining our priorities first or not? No, that is the work that I have tried to present through a text which is the Universal Declaration of Humankind. I think the specificity of that is that a number of public bodies and cities have adopted it, but also lots of NGOs and private sector businesses and international organizations, the Parliamentary Assembly of a number of different regions, to give you an example. So what is the whole interest of this? The idea is to share values. And what is that? It is the responsibility of one generation passing it on to the next one. We don't just have climate to deal with, we have biodiversity, and we have all of the questions related to human health too. And then dignity is another issue, human dignity and our personal development. And then what about intergenerational equity? We haven't talked a lot about that, I know, but it's absolutely clear that we cannot continue to act and behave as if we were some little kids that we want everything in life, and we have to ensure that the human species continues to survive, and other species as well. And the Mayor of Bilbao talked about his values. We need to ensure that we can respect those values. If we can't respect those values, we will not be able to implement resilience policies because we won't be able to adapt. Adaptation has to be something that we do individually, each one of us, but also as collective entities, we have to do it, and also on the scale of humankind to be able to understand our rights and our duties. We don't just have rights, we have duties too. And this is so important for us today. This ability to pick up so many different themes, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard so many different issues today: quality of life in cities, water development. My fellow panelists were talking about natural hazards and risks, and we have to deal with those natural disasters too. And it is absolutely clear to me that we all have an ability to come up with an individual response to all of those threats and challenges, and to do that perhaps at a modest level, because adaptation policies such as reduction of greenhouse gases, we can do that ourselves and help there with prevention. But on a collective level, cities definitely have a role to play, because they are the most affected, and I think they are called on to do something by their citizens, not just when there is a local problem, but overall, so that we can all become organized, because we need to do this at a statewide level too. And what is so important today is that we need to have sharing between private and public businesses and sectors. We have to share between cities, regions, and perhaps even states too. And for rights, we need to be able to say this is what we want as a collective will, and we need to adapt to the new times that we're facing today. Thank you.
Thank you for that input, and perhaps that last element is the most significant, and I think we've heard that from all of our speakers today, is that, you know, when we think about new approaches, the use of science, new values, vertical integration, I think we're talking about a new sense of community amongst cities and between cities and their regions, and indeed between cities and other spheres of government. So I think that's one of the big messages coming out of this discussion here today. Just to wrap up, Mr. Bhatia, you've got a tough call, because I'm going to ask you to pull out some of those key issues that you've heard today and link them to the Sendai Action Plan and the relevance between what you've heard and the Sendai Framework.
Yeah. I think the discussion here has been really excellent, and I would like to congratulate all the panelists. It covers very well all that the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction talks about. Just so that everyone is well informed, when the Sendai framework was being negotiated and finally adopted in 2015, it was the first time that mayors were consulted. And in the World Conference, which was organized in Sendai in Japan, there were 100 mayors present. And so this was a very interesting dynamic of local governments influencing the national negotiators. So, and that was the first time, at least in the field of disaster risk reduction, that this happened. Today, I think all the, one of the very key points of the Sendai framework have been addressed by the panelists here. And I would say the most important one is that Sendai recognizes the underlying drivers of risk. So trying to move the discussion away from just talking about the kind of risks we know of, like earthquakes and typhoons and volcanoes and so on, but looking also at the underlying drivers of risk, such as poverty, access to education, access to health, sanitation, immunization, so on. So all these issues are underlying drivers of risk, and I think it's come out very well in the discussion on the values, because that's what the objective is, to try to address the underlying drivers of risk. Also, I'd like to mention about the issue, again, another very important issue which the Sendai also talks about, the Sendai framework, but has been discussed here, is about recovering. So, but not just recovering, but building back better. So, for example, the two examples here we saw of the polluted river being, recovery from that, recovery from landslides, and recovery from Typhoon Haiyan, and so on. So, trying to, what that means is looking at what worked and what didn't work, and then trying to fix those issues, not just for today, but for the future generations. So learning from the disasters and addressing the underlying risk drivers, either through mitigation or adaptation, as has been pointed out. And I think another important point which was mentioned here is that reducing disaster risk is also an investment. It's not a cost, it's an investment. It's an investment, firstly, it's an investment in the future for the next generation, for the youth, but it's also, it also helps the city attain a position where it can attract business, tourism was mentioned, and other means of employment. So it needs to be seen in the bigger picture that resilience is helping to create jobs and to sustain those jobs. Another important point here, which has come out very clearly in the discussions, is the all of society approach. So we talked about youth, we talked about senior citizens, we talked about indigenous people. So, and that's what the Sendai framework also talks about. It is all of society approach. Everyone has a role to play. Everyone is impacted, and everyone should be, everyone's needs should be addressed. So taking it down to the community level, to the rural level, that is very important. The national to local, and also with the regional intervening. So national, regional, local. That's a very, very important concept for implementation of the Sendai framework. And I think networks such as the UCLG can really push this agenda even further, because it is the cities where the impacts are felt. It's, I mean, when I say city, I mean cities, local governments, and even the smaller towns, the municipalities, and the rural areas. I mean all of them. That's where the impact is felt, and therefore there needs to be this very good coordination between the national, the regional, and the local, which we don't see often, but that is something that we all need to work towards. And then the issue of finance also, it was mentioned that the regional can be a source of finance, but also I would say that we need to see resilience and risk reduction as part of the development program. So it's the urban planning, the local government planning, with which it needs to be integrated, and that is going to be the source of finance. So, and then of course, most important, the issues of human dignity, biodiversity. So all of these, we have to understand that, and that's what the Sendai framework also says, cities are a system of systems. And there are different systems, and they all need to work together coherently and be resilient. So all the systems need to be resilient so that the local government can be resilient. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thanks for those summary comments, and thank you particularly because we're sitting here in Africa for underscoring poverty as probably one of the greatest sources of risk to human society. So I think on that note, you've had a lot of input. This is your opportunity to reflect, to ask questions of our panel. I'm assuming we'll have someone to carry a roving microphone around if there are any points of reflection from the audience or questions. Do I see any hands? It's very hard to actually see out against this light. I don't see any comments from the floor. Any questions? No one wants to reflect on volcanoes, which has been such an interesting input. Yes, I have a hand somewhere in the dark in the middle ground over there.
Thank you very much. Just to launch the debate. So, no, my question is to the mayors on the stage. That next year, my question is linked also to Sendai framework. Next year we'll report on one of the targets, which is target E of the Sendai framework. Target E is to increase the number of national and local strategy for disaster risk reduction. And the question is, are the cities here sitting are prepared to report next year to say they have their own plan, municipal plan or regional plan for disaster risk reduction?
So I don't see any other hands, so let me open that question to our mayors. The question for you is, as mayors of the various cities, are you prepared next year to report back on your own local version of the disaster risk reduction strategies. So perhaps Mayor of Bilbao, you'd like to kick off?
Well, I have tried to explain in the first, when I have talked about the situation of the city of Bilbao. I have told you about the recuperation, the recovering of our estuary, in which we have invested nearly 1,000 million euros. So one of the most important investments we did in the city, in the transformation of the city, was the Guggenheim Museum, in which we invested 130 euros. So this means that in the recuperation of our estuary, we have invested as many as 8 Guggenheim museums. So in that case, next year we'll have built the two stone tanks I have told you about. We will be doing the increasing the level of the island, of the knowledge island I have told you about. It's a surface of about 800,000 square meters, and we will be increasing as well the level of the wall all along the river, all along the estuary. So this means that with these works, we will try to avoid the risk of floods. We had in 1983 the most important floods of the last 200 years, in which 38 people died in the city because of the floods. So I think that we are trying to do our work, and we will be able to present our inform. And on the other hand, with the green belt, with the forest all around the city, we are reforesting the mountains with native species. We are acquiring the ownership of these forests, and we are trying to connect all these forests with all the upper neighborhoods of the city for the people to be able to enjoy them. As well, we are doing a new urban plan in the city, and in this urban plan, we are talking about the permeability of the fields of the city, in which we are going to build new houses without not consuming new fields, without not consuming new green fields. These should be the three parts in which we are working. And the last one, the fourth one, should be the public transport, in which we are working. We have agreed with all the political parties with presence in the city of Bilbao, and a plan for the mobility, for the urban and mobility in the city. And in this plan, we have, I think that there are 51 different actions to try to reduce the using of the car and to work for a sustainable mobility in the city of Bilbao.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time in our session. I've just been told that our interpreters will leave promptly. So we began with Bilbao, and we're going to end with Bilbao. Thank you for that final input. It seems we've got a circular economy on the stage. So I'd like us to all give a round of applause for our panelists for their brilliant insights into this difficult and interesting topic. And thank you for staying with us throughout the session.